Welcome this week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. This week, the 2025 legislative session ended, and we get perspective from Democrat Representative Jermaine Johnson and the Republican perspective from House Education Committee Chairwoman Shannon Erickson, who is with me right now to talk about some major education bills that passed this session. Chairwoman, thanks for making time for us.
Thank you. I had to bring a cheat sheet. We had so much that we got done in our committee this year.
I know.
It's been a great year.
And one of those big bills was that school choice bill. That was a major priority that we saw come out of the Senate. First week in the Senate, they took that up. They started working through it, got to the House, and you all did the same too. This is in response to what the Supreme Court said, that you all can't send public dollars to fund private schools. But you all have a different perspective on this. You believe that you found a workaround to this. So tell us about that bill and what's in that bill.
So the Education Scholarship Trust Fund, the premise was not sending money to private schools, but sending money to children. It's those eligible children that really was the key factor. And that's what we heard from the Supreme Court in our last decision that gave us the roadmap to say, all right, we didn't specify strongly enough that the funds went to the child, and we set up an actual trustee, someone who's not related to housed in a government entity. This would be someone who would be contracted with to be that trustee. The funds go to the child. It sits in an account. It ceases to be public money when the child receives the money in their account. That trustee would oversee the expenditures of that. Now, how does the trigger of the money flow? The parent fills out the application. They are either eligible or not eligible, and when the money comes to the child, they have up to, in our bill, $7,500 to be able to choose from a laundry list of educational opportunities that help that specific child. And that's really, I believe, what kind of captured the hearts and minds of the people that we've been working with on this school choice option. You can just do tutoring if that's what your child needs. You could actually transfer to another public school. Some of them charge fees if you're not in their district. You could use those funds to pay those fees. You can use it for a school, but they all have to have norm reference testing. There's certain parameters, and all of that laundry list, all of those vendors, they have to go through an entire process of being approved to be a vendor. So there's accountability on both sides.
Yeah, so a major win for Republicans. The governor signed this bill into law
He
as
did.
well.
He
And
did.
so this will originally start with 15,000 students that qualify, and then you said $7,500 per student. So when we talk about that money, where's that money coming from? I know the Senate originally talked about using education lottery funds. This bill also made it a little bit more open-ended on how you guys can allocate money.
Well, the good news is when we started this, 4 years ago, the House set aside funding with Department of Education in as they needed it, and so there's money sitting there. We actually have funds there, and we had allocated in our budgets for the next few cycles, a penciled-in mark of, okay, we've made this commitment. So it does not draw any education funding from our typical education funding sources. This is new revenue. This is revenue that comes directly to this stream.
But isn't that tax dollars?
It's people's money. It's the parents' money. Tax dollars belong to the people of the state. So there is no government money. It goes into the child's account. The child is a citizen. We do the same thing with our scholarships for higher education. They go to any college a child wants to go to if they meet the criteria, and we even do it with our 4-year-olds. And we had the bookends. We didn't have the middle. So now we have the middle.
And when we talk about this funding, are there any concerns from the districts, the school districts, that there might be some loss of funding or any situations like that because of this?
They actually brought to the table deep concerns about it originally back. I believe that we have assuaged some of those by setting up the trustee and setting up the other funding stream. Now, anytime in education, and I've been in education a long time, you have silos. I mean, we have push and pull between every type of education you can have because there are finite dollars in the world. I mean, it's competition. But if we want to fund every child and have that child get the best, then we've got to give options. We're seeing that, especially with the ability for the families to choose something that fits best for them, the child's happier, the family's happier, and we get better results. Even if that's a public choice. It's public, private, faith-based, as long as they are eligible, and that's part of the piece. They have to, have that accountability. And some folks may not want to do that. We did limit it this year to be only nonprofits.
Okay.
So there are no for-profit programs getting funding in this.
And you think there's sufficient oversight when it comes to
They're
where
all
this goes?
they're required to have random audits, at least one per year, all of them, all of our vendors.
And when we pivot to another major win for y'all this year, to one of those on your sheet, the Educator Assistance Act.
Yes.
This is something you've been working hard for years, and another big priority for y'all. It also enjoyed a lot of support, bipartisan, unanimous support, I believe. Tell us about this bill, soon to be a law, what it means for teachers.
The governor signed it yesterday.
Okay,
today.
there we go.
Yeah. I got to get a shout out to our governor. He said early on in his administration that he was going to work on education and support teachers, and he is doing that. It is an honor to work with him, and how quickly he signed those bills is a good indicator of the priority that he sets for our state in that. So, so the Senate picked up the school choice piece as their first piece of legislation. The House picked up the Educator Assistance Act as its first piece of legislation. We'd only passed it 4 times before, so what was one more? And each time, each iteration, you have more collaborators, you have more people come to the table, but this was literally everybody working together saying, how do we get rid of red tape? How can we help our teachers not feel inundated with this every 5-year recertification, which we do to no other profession? You get your certification now, you keep it, you do your professional development, and that counts toward your recertification, and you don't have to fill all that paperwork out again. We worked on contracts because we were asking teachers to sign contracts for a whole year of work without any details. Not schools, not age of children, not even salary.
Oh.
And I don't know many people who would go to work and do that. I'm blessed to have been around great educators my whole life, and they do it because it's a calling, not because they're waiting for on that bottom line. But they still should be treated respectfully and as professionals. And I don't think there are many professions that we'd see signing a blank contract and saying, yeah, I'll step in and fill your space for you and do a good job. Exactly when do you think you might tell me what it is I'm going to make?
When and where, yeah.
That's, I think that part of it. We also took out, the law required that if there were any action of loss of certification, that it had to be at least a year. I mean, it required that. We've now given them flexibility on that, so that if there's an issue, the circumstances can match and not be an arbitrary number. We also have given a ability, teachers, silly, really, I mean crazy, that they could not resign due to some kind of family emergency or even a move of their family. They would quite literally lose their certification if they broke the contract for any reason.
Wow.
So now they have the ability to submit, my husband, my spouse, my wife, somebody has a job move, or I have a parent that I need to care for, something, and they can then leave that certification. Again, it's treating those folks like true professionals.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud that we've gotten that done.
And when you talk about this, you see this as a way to boost recruitment and retention as well?
Absolutely.
I mean, because I feel like we're always talking about teacher salaries, which you can bring up in a moment, but this is just going to be one more, I guess, tool in the toolbox to keep people.
It's entirely that. When the state did its teacher recruitment and retention task force, and we put so many people in a room, dynamic leaders in education, run by our late and dearly departed Barbara Nielsen, who did just the lion's share of work. One of those things was these barriers that push teachers out of the classroom or keep them out of the classroom. And we're kind of taking that as a little bit of a roadmap and some check marks on those. Teachers also asked for a leave bank. They accrue leave, sick time, and most of them don't use it and they lose it. Now they can donate it and put it into a fund where those people who they're working side by side need it can use it, and it's voluntary. It's not mandatory, but that's one of the things that came from the discussions
Like state
with the
employers
teachers.
have that too, yeah. So
Exactly.
but when we talk about the salaries, what is it looking like for starting teacher pay and also step increases in the budget as it stands right now?
Right now, I think everyone will see an increase. The next increment in our starting teacher to the road to 50,000 will be at 48.5. We've worked together with Chairman Bannister, and I'm almost as certain as I could be that we'll see the next step in that next session next year.
Right.
So yeah, I think we're there. And everyone else will be receiving a pay increase as well. That's something I don't think you'll see us letting our foot off on the gas. As you said,
Yeah.
salaries are not honestly, they're not the number one thing teachers want. You know what they're loving? Not having cell phones in their classrooms.
I bet, yeah.
That's probably one of the biggest things we've heard for teachers in the classroom, engagement and behavior.
And we have just less than 2 minutes, but
Yeah.
when we talk about that funding, I mean, $50,000 has been a mark that the governor said. You see that? I think you said keep going on the gas with that. I mean, that's
Oh,
where you want
I
to
don't
get.
think
Just
we
keep
stopped
going.
there.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we need to not let that become something that gets stagnant, and I think we had. We'd also had a bad practice of putting it into a district and letting districts decide. Now we're actually telling them that these are specifically for salaries.
And just one more, Bill, before we talk about some politics, but really quick, what do you want to see happen next year? What are some of your legislative focuses for next year that didn't get done this year? You have a whole list. Let's pick one.
Well, I've got special stuff I'm working on. Special education is probably one of them. We need to really help our teachers and retain and recruit more. High school league. They've promised to sit down and work with us, and I'm going to hold their feet to the fire and ask them to do that. They've got to be more accountable, and I'd like to see the students higher on the list of how to work on things than programs. And I'm hopeful. I've also got a charter school reform that I'm working on. I've got a legislative audit coming from LAC that I want to see. I know Senator Hembree's been working on his. I don't have it yet, so we're going to start that process as well. On the other side of my committee, we'll be doing some DOT modernization, I hope.
Right, the public works aspect of it.
Public
When we
works
talk
aspect,
about your
yeah.
committee, we have 30 seconds. There's a lot of different personalities, both in the committee, in the chamber, and the State House. How do you work together across parties and also internally to get things done? 30 seconds.
It's been fantastic. We have people from all over the state. So you get a lot of varied personalities, but perspective. And all of them have different jobs in a variety of educational backgrounds. And really, truly, I thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to mesh this? We've meshed because they're open and honest, and the respect and dialogue that we have had, we've had civil discourse. And we can prove that that can happen. We can disagree and still get along, still work on a product, and make it as good as we can do. And I am so proud of our team. I hope I've thanked all of them. I've tried to thank all of them this year. Been one of the most dynamic, hardworking groups of people I've ever been honored to work with.
And the proof is in the pudding. That's House Education Committee Chairwoman Shannon Erickson. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Appreciate that.
Joining me now for the Democratic perspective is Richland County Democratic Representative Jermaine Johnson. Representative Johnson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we were just talking to House Education Committee Chairwoman Shannon Erickson about the House education bill. We're talking about the school voucher bill that started in the Senate, worked its way through the House. You were outspoken in the House when that bill was going through. Tell us about your issues with that bill that's now a law that the governor signed, dealing with school vouchers, education scholarship accounts.
Well, the main issue that I had with it is that it's been deemed unconstitutional time and time again. And it's like we haven't learned our lesson. It's like, you touch something hot and then you realize it was hot and then you got to spank it for it and then you go back and say, well, let me see if it's hot and I'll get the same reaction this time, and you do it again. And we haven't learned our lesson. It continues to come back and back and back, and we continue to fight the same fight. And I don't understand why we can't understand what's going on and what the Supreme Court is going to rule on this. I had some issues when it came to the transportation parts, but we also have to look at individuals who are in these rural communities, in these rural counties that don't have access to private schools or things like that to use the benefits of this voucher program. So if there's no private school within 50 to 100 miles for them to get to one of these schools, how are they going to take advantage of these opportunities? So we have to look at who this is really serving and what the purpose of it is for.
And when you talk about who it's really serving, do you think it's not getting to the people that folks are saying it should be going to, these people who maybe don't have the best public schools, want to have a different opportunity to go to a private school?
Right. So I made that argument on the floor. It was about, well, how are my kids down in Gadsden, South Carolina, going to get to a Heathwood Hall or a Hammond? How are they going to get to these schools? How are these kids in Chester going to get to these locations if there's no private school in their area? How are they really going to benefit from it? So that was one of the amendments that I even offered up, was to change the amount allocated for transportation purposes. And now what they're saying is, okay, we'll allow you to use use a little bit more money for the transportation purposes, but you have to hire a driver service or you have to get a private, company to go ahead and do that. Well, now you're right back at square one, because who are you going to trust with your children anyways to drive them 100 miles every day to school, and you're not seeing them. So there are plenty of issues that we have with this program. It's also not serving the differently able individuals, because these schools can now say, we don't want to take them. We're just going to take just the ones who are the least problematic. We have to serve the least of these, just like all of our public schools do.
And then you're talking about the constitutionality of this all. Do you think that, this is going back to the Supreme Court? Proponents of this bill, this law, are now saying that it will pass the Supreme Court muster, the constitutional prohibition against sending public dollars to private education. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think we might be back here next year in session trying to get around the Supreme Court again?
Only time will tell on this situation. We have different administration. We've got, different dynamics, all the way across the United States right now. Different opinions are coming up. People are changing their minds on certain things. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know where we're going to be at. But all I know is the best predictor of future is, past.
Yeah.
And what we have seen is been unconstitutional. So if they continue on with the same line of reasoning, we'll be right back here next year arguing about the same thing.
Yeah, and it could eventually at some point go before the voters and change the Constitution that way. But that remains to be seen. I'm sure that's the last effort there. But talking about other things that you were kind of outspoken for this session was that anti-DEI bill, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion bill, that made it out of the House in early April. It's stuck in the Senate Judiciary Committee, hasn't gone anywhere over in the Senate. But this bill used similar language to President Donald Trump's executive orders involving DEI. The bill doesn't actually seem to do too much. It seems like it's just trying to uphold current anti-discrimination federal laws there, but it prohibits schools and state employees from being forced to take DEI training. So what was your message on this legislation on the floor? Well,
my question to the voters and to my colleagues was, which part of diversity don't you like? Which part of equity don't you like? Which definition don't you like? Was it inclusion? Which one was oppressing you in this situation? And I spoke about that. And the main issue that I had is that when it was first introduced, we saw how bad it was for the state of South Carolina. We saw the report that came out that it was going to cost the state and taxpayers $86 million to implement something that was not a problem. I mean, was diversity, equity, inclusion a problem when we got Volvo here? Was it a problem when we got Boeing here? Was it a problem when we got Scout and we invested in Scout Motors? When did this all of a sudden become a problem for the people of South Carolina? Now all of a sudden we have a new administration in the White House. Now all of a sudden it's a problem. And that was my issue going along with this entire bill, was they tried to sneak it through. It was so bad for everybody in South Carolina. I mean, it was so bad that, we have domestic violence shelters in this state. That bill, if it would have passed the way it was currently written, would have allowed men to go inside those domestic violence shelters. I mean, it was so bad. It would have stopped people from doing, DHEC from doing research on prostate cancer or doing things like that. We had to really take a look at that thing. And when I shined a lot of light on the issues and the problems of that thing, they decided to say, well, let's take a different look. And then they rewrote it, and then they did another look at it and rewrote it again. And now that's landed us to where we have today.
So just kind of almost just doing something to do something, even though it's almost making more problems than it's worth.
I mean, that's what we do here in South Carolina. We have solutions in search of a problem. And when we don't have a problem, we want to fix things that aren't necessarily broken, because we have been, one of the best economic drivers, in this country has been in South Carolina. BMW. I mean, all these companies they're coming here. They want to come here. They're spreading their roots here. But all of a sudden, we have a new administration. Everything is all of a sudden a problem.
So in that vein there, Representative Johnson, a lot of similar arguments you had made on this bill, this anti-DEI bill, was also a lot that we heard when you all were talking about critical race theory, and that was the big thing a year or two ago. Now this DEI stuff was a big issue. And again, CRT was never taught in K through 12 schools in the state. That was something that really kind of got spun up and I think lost in the conversation. But what do you think will be the next big issue? It seems like we're talking about all these things and, like you're saying, solutions in search of problems here. We have a 2-year session this year, it's done, but we're back in 2026 in January. What do you think is going to be the next big social issue you all have to combat?
Well, I love this question because I've answered it on several other interviews that I've done where we in South Carolina like to create boogeymen. I mean, at one point, pregnant women were the boogeyman. CRT, like you said, was the boogeyman. DEI was the boogeyman. LGBTQ people, they're the boogeymen. Every session we have a different boogeyman. So only time will tell what the boogeyman is going to become in the next session that we're going to be coming up. But there has to be some sort of a boogeyman. We have some gubernatorial candidates right now that are talking about their boogeymen instead of they're fighting against certain things and that type of stuff. And if you just go online, you can see it right now. Somebody has created their own boogeyman to get the votes that they're looking for. And I think we need to really stop looking for boogeymen in South Carolina and start looking out for the people who are suffering the most in this state. So these social issues, I have no idea which one is going to be, but I won't be surprised when I start to hear about it.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you're talking about the 2026 gubernatorial race. We haven't seen anyone declare yet, but again, everyone's kind of jostling in the background. I'm sure we'll see some announcements soon. But kind of flipping the script a little bit, Republicans have had a supermajority in the House for a while, 88 Republicans, 36 Democrats, and it's not all fighting. Y'all do actually vote together on some things. In fact, there's not even that much animosity. There's actually some collegiality at times. So when it comes down to these issues, when do you decide to work together maybe, and when do you decide to fight? I mean, when does that dividing line, where's that?
Well, the good thing about what we do in the General Assembly is that most things, I say a good 95% of the issues that come across our desk are bipartisan things. We come up with ways to really solve the issues. And if you've been looking at the LCI committee this year with our new chairman, Bill Herb Kirschman, if you see whenever we pass bills, he has all of us come stand up there at the well, and we stand together as a bipartisan unit saying, hey, this is good for business in South Carolina. This is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is just what's good for business and people in South Carolina. The only time you really see us getting at it and fighting is when it's a social issue, something that was created on Fox News, or something that was created on CNN, or something that was created out there by the White House, that just came up with something. So I think that is the main issue that we have, is just getting away from some of these social issues. Now, if I were the leader of this state, I would deal with those issues first. I would deal with the issues that really affect the most people in this state, and we'll save social issues for the end, because those are the things that affect 0.0001% of people in this state, and that's really just a talking point for dinner tables and during Thanksgiving and Christmas.
And when we talk about working together, there's also internal fighting, not so much on the Democratic side, but more on the Republican side too, specifically in the House, where you have the far-right House Freedom Caucus. It's about 17 or 18 members, give or take, that really kind of jostle with the Republican leadership there. Again, there's 88 Republicans in the House chamber, but we did see some more issues this past couple weeks with the House, not the House, but actually the Family Caucus, which spans both chambers there, and its leader, Greenwood Republican Representative John McCravey, who was on the record confirmed by House Majority Leader Davey Hyatt for making anti-Semitic and homophobic language, and he was one of several Republicans' leadership that was targeted by outside groups such as Students for Life, which McCravey refused to denounce. So a lot of internal fighting going on over in the Republican Party. I'm assuming you guys can just kind of sit back and watch it, but did you have any takes after you heard some of these allegations and actually some of these confirmed statements come out?
Absolutely, and it's been extremely frustrating for me, because it just goes back to my DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion debate, and when I was up there talking at the well about it. It was, don't support me in private, support me in public. Don't come to me after the situation has been going forward. Denounce it in public. Tell everybody that this is wrong. You are supposed to be a leader of this state. And if you are a leader in the House, I don't care if you're Republican, a Democrat, or black or white, you do what is right. You are to stand up for what's right. And when people come out with these anti-Semitic rhetoric or racial rhetoric that they have been known to do, speak up about it. Make it known that you're not going to tolerate that type of hate and that type of rhetoric in this state. That this is a state that will welcome everybody, that we love everybody, that we will accept everybody, and we will do things under the rule of law. And I don't think that the Republican Party is really taking a stance on this. I think they talk about it in the back room. I think they talk about it amongst themselves. I think they talk about it with us, but I don't think that they get out there and publicly denounce this type of stuff, so that the vast majority of the 5.3 million people in the state can see that leaders will stand together on these things. Yeah,
we did see 29 Republicans leave the Family Caucus, but again, a lot of that was on the grounds of these outside groups targeting not necessarily the rhetoric that we heard coming out from their leader. We have about 3 minutes left, Representative Johnson. I want to ask you about just this major shift that that we saw happen that affected Democrats and Republicans. That was in the budget, dealing with earmarks, money going back to folks' districts, whether it's for projects, infrastructure, or other initiatives with community groups, nonprofit groups. You spoke out against this multiple times this week too, a couple of amendments on the budget when it came back to the House before it went back to the Senate. So what was your issue with that there too? It sounds like they were trying to maybe put this money towards other needs in the state, but it sounded like you had some other opinions on that.
Yeah, I had a lot of other opinions. So I actually filed close to 60 amendments for the budget, and the amendments weren't to actually change anything in the budget. It was to highlight the programs that they were actually defunding in the state that were actually doing the work. And I called out my colleagues in there. I said, listen, if you're the one who's going to do this cancer research, raise your hand and let me know. If you're the one who's out here serving these young people who are homeless, let me know. If you're the ones who are out here going to these schools and volunteering, let me know. But nobody is doing that work. We have organizations across the state that are receiving the state funds to do the work of the people. I mean, one of the organizations that I highlighted was about sickle cell. We know lots of people in this state are dealing with the sickle cell trait. Well, that organization will no longer get the funding. We have an organization here that deals with the Children's Trust, with abuse and neglect for children. Over 13,000 kids last year were victims of abuse and neglect. They are now not getting that funding to help solve that issue. Domestic violence in the state, they're not getting funding to solve that issue. And these are things that they're putting on the back burner. They're saying that the people in leadership are saying they're just not priorities for us. They're just not important enough for them to continue to get the funding to help solve these issues and eradicate these issues in this state. And that was the problem that I had. I wanted to shed some light on that to say, hey, listen, this is not pork. This is not an earmark. This is community investment. This is public investment, and this is good for the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, and that's also on the backs of what we're seeing from the federal level too, with funding issues and constraints there for some of these groups. So we're going to have to leave it there. That's the end of the 2025 session. That's Representative Jermaine Johnson. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Absolutely.
And that's it for us this week. For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.